The mist over the lake that morning was just how I liked it, cool and quiet, hanging low over the water like a soft gray blanket. At 68, these little routines are what keep the world turning straight. I took my first sip of coffee, the good stuff I grind myself, and felt the warmth spread through my hands. Out on the dock, the old wood was damp under my slippers, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the pilings. This was my piece of paradise. My late wife Sarah and I had built the cabin behind me with our own 2 hands, right down to the little boathouse at the end of this dock. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was 30 years of memories soaked into the grain. I was halfway through my coffee when I spotted it, something bright orange tacked to the boathouse door. It looked angry against the calm gray morning. I walked closer, my stomach tightening just a little. It wasn't taped, it was nailed. A single thick-headed nail driven right into the wood Sarah and I had painted together a decade ago. That felt wrong, like a violation before I even knew what it was. I pulled the nail out with my fingers, leaving a small, ugly hole. The paper was some kind of official notice. The header read, Lakeside Pines Homeowners Association. That was the first alarm bell. I wasn't a member of any Lakeside Pines HOA. My property line stopped a full half-mile from their manicured little kingdom. My grandfather had bought this land clear and free, and the deed I kept locked in my file cabinet confirmed it. Below the heading, in big bold letters, it said, Final Notice, Unpaid HOA Dues. Demolition Scheduled. My eyes scanned the page. The amount due was listed as $11,740.26. The number was so specific, so official-looking, that it was almost convincing. It listed a dozen different violations, things like unapproved siding color and non-compliant dock maintenance. The dock I was standing on, the one I'd replanked myself last summer. But the worst part was at the bottom, deadline, 3 days. 3 days, or they claimed they had the right to tear my boathouse down. My first thought wasn't anger, it was confusion. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Someone in an office must have clicked the wrong address on a map. That happens. I went back inside, set my coffee down on the counter, and looked at the number listed for the HOA secretary. I dialed it, expecting a quick and sensible conversation. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and sugary, like she was selling something. Lakeside Pines, this is Mara. How can I help you? I explained who I was and the notice I'd found nailed to my door. I was polite. Ma'am, I believe there's been a mix-up. My property isn't part of your association. She made a little tootang sound. Oh, Mr. Weller. Yes, I see your file right here. It looks like you're quite a bit behind on your dues. She spoke as if I were a child who'd forgotten his homework. I held my ground. There are no dues because I'm not a member. The county plat map shows my property line is outside your jurisdiction. She sighed, a long, practiced sound of fake patience. Well, our records here show that your parcel was annexed 6 weeks ago following a community vote. I'm sure you received the paperwork, but don't you worry, she said, her voice dropping to a reassuring coo. I can see how this might be a shock. I'll flag it as a potential clerical mix-up. I assure you it'll be all fixed before any crew is scheduled to arrive. Her words were meant to calm me down, but they did the opposite. Something about the way she said, community vote, and annexed, felt rehearsed and slippery. Still, she'd said she would fix it. I had to take her at her word. For now. I thanked her and hung up, feeling uneasy but telling myself the system would work. A mistake was made, a mistake would be corrected. The next morning, the mist was gone, replaced by a hard, bright sun. I was making my coffee when I heard it, the low rumble of a heavy engine and the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. It wasn't the sound of a neighbor's pickup. This was different. I walked to the front window, and my heart sank. Parked right where my driveway met the little access road was a big dual-axle flatbed truck. On it sat a yellow backhoe, its hydraulic arm folded up like a sleeping insect. A man in a reflective vest and hard hat hopped out of the truck's cab. He was big, burly, with a face that looked like he rarely smiled. He walked toward my front door, holding a clipboard. I met him on the porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He grunted, not looking me in the eye. He just pointed a thick finger at my cabin. "Tom Weller." "I am," I said. He nodded slowly. "I'm Ted, the foreman with Kruger Demolition. We've got a work order here to take down that boathouse." He tapped his clipboard. "And if the site isn't cleared, we start on the main cabin." I stood there, stunned. "There's a mistake. I called yesterday. The HOA secretary said she was handling it." Ted finally looked at me, his eyes tired. "Mister, I don't know anything about that. All I know is we've got orders. She told us to be here at sunup. The order says we either get a certified check for 12 grand or we take it down." He jerked his thumb back toward the backhoe. "And that thing starts easy." The foreman's words hung in the air, heavier than the diesel fumes from his truck. This was real. The sugary voice on the phone was a lie, and the proof was a 10-ton piece of machinery sitting in my driveway, ready to turn my life into splinters. For a moment, I just stared at him, my mind racing. Arguing with this man was pointless. He was just a tool, like the backhoe he brought with him. He was following orders. I gave a slow nod, trying to look calmer than I felt. "All right," I said, my voice raspy. "Let me make a phone call." I turned without waiting for a reply, walked back inside, and locked the deadbolt. The click of the lock sounded loud in the quiet house. My hands were trembling slightly. I needed to call someone who wouldn't just tell me it was a clerical error. I needed someone who knew how to deal with bullies who hid behind rules they wrote themselves. I dialed my oldest, Dana. She picked up on the first ring, her voice crisp and clear. "Dad, you okay?" I explained everything, the orange notice, the phone call with the woman named Mara, and now the backhoe parked 20 feet from my porch. I tried to keep my voice even, but she could hear the strain. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, there was a short, sharp silence on her end. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. It was the voice she used when she wasn't just my daughter anymore. It was the voice of Special Agent Weller. "Dad, listen to me carefully," she said, her words precise and deliberate. "Do not go back outside. Do not talk to the foreman. Don't say another word to them. Go to every window and take a picture with your phone. Get the truck, get the backhoe, get the license plate on both. If you can get a clear shot of the man, do it. Then go to your file cabinet. Find the deed to the property and the last property tax bill you paid. Find the survey you had done when you built the boathouse. I want you to take a clear picture of every single page. Everyone. Do you understand?" I did. This was a script, a procedure. I was a retired electrician. I understood following a checklist. "Yes," I said. "Good," she replied. "Email them to me right now. Then I want you to get in your car and drive to the county clerk's office. Be polite. Be calm. Ask for a certified copy of the current official plat map for your parcel. Don't just look at it. Get the certified copy. It'll cost a few dollars. Pay it. That piece of paper is your shield. I have to go, but I'll call you back as soon as I have something. I love you, Dad. Now do it." The line went dead. The call couldn't have lasted more than 3 minutes, but it had changed everything. Fear was being replaced by focus. I had a mission. I spent the next hour following her instructions to the letter. I was methodical. I photographed the demolition truck from the kitchen window, the living room window, and the upstairs bedroom, zooming in on the license plate until the numbers were perfectly clear. I photographed the foreman, who was now leaning against his truck, smoking a cigarette and looking bored. Then I went to the old metal file cabinet in my office. Inside, tucked in a folder labeled House, was every piece of paper that proved this land was mine. The original deed from my grandfather, signed in 1962. my deed, signed when I inherited it, the blueprints for the cabin, and the official county survey from 30 years ago, its lines clear and undeniable, showing my property ending hundreds of yards from where the Lakeside Pines HOA even began. I laid each one out on the kitchen table and took pictures, just as she'd said. I made sure my phone setting to display the date and time on each photo was turned on. Document everything. That was the rule. It felt good to be doing something, to be building a case instead of just waiting for an attack. When I was done, I drove to the county building downtown. It was one of those old brick buildings that smelled of dusty paper and floor wax. At the records counter, a young woman with tired eyes listened patiently. I need a certified copy of the plat map for parcel number 75B1, I said, giving her the number for my tax bill. She typed it into her computer, clicked a few times, and then swiveled the monitor toward me. This one right here, she asked. On the screen was a map. I saw the outline of the lake, and I saw my little square of land right beside it. I saw the heavy black line that marked the boundary of the Lakeside Pines HOA. And I saw that my property was completely, indisputably outside of it. A wave of relief washed over me. It was a small win, but it felt huge. It was the truth, right there in black and white on a government computer. That's it, I said. I need a certified copy. She nodded, printed the map, and then stamped it with a heavy, satisfying clunk. She signed it, and the seal she pressed into the corner made it official. This wasn't just a piece of paper anymore, it was evidence. I was driving back home, the certified map on the passenger seat like a trophy, when my phone rang. It was Dana. "Okay, I've got something," she said, and her voice was grim. "Dad, this isn't a mistake. It's a target." "What do you mean?" I asked, turning onto the road leading back to my cabin. "I did a quick background check on your HOA president, Mara Jansen," Dana explained. "This isn't her first time at the rodeo. Over the last 5 years, she has filed altered property maps in 2 other counties. She finds a property she wants, usually one with water access that's adjacent to an HOA she controls. Then a new, slightly different map gets filed with the county, one where the boundary line has mysteriously moved. 6 weeks ago, she filed an altered map for your area. That's the community vote she was talking about. She forged it." My hands gripped the steering wheel. The sugary voice on the phone now sounded sinister in my memory. The polite-sounding secretary wasn't just mistaken, she was a predator. This entire thing, the notice, the fees, the threat of demolition, it was all a calculated attack designed to make me panic and either pay or sell. As I pulled into my driveway, the demolition truck was gone. The foreman and his backhoe had vanished. For a second, I felt a flash of hope, thinking my trip to the clerk's office had scared them off. But then I looked at my house, and I saw him. A man in a collared shirt with the Lakeside Pines logo was standing on the road, partially hidden by a tree. He was holding a camera with a long telephoto lens, and it was pointed directly at my living room window. He was taking pictures, documenting my violations from a distance. The realization settled in my gut like a block of ice. They weren't gone. They were just getting started. Dana was right. This wasn't a clerical error. This was targeted harassment. And I was the target. The man with the camera was gone by the time the first black sedan pulled into my driveway. I knew it was Dana before she even stepped out. She moved with a purpose that you don't forget. She wasn't my little girl coming for a weekend visit. This was a federal agent arriving at a scene. She gave me a firm hug on the porch, her eyes scanning the property over my shoulder, taking in the house, the lake, the woods. "You did good, Dad," she said quietly. "The photos are perfect." A few minutes later, 2 more cars arrived, both dark, clean, and official looking. My boys. Ray got out of the first one. At 38, my middle son carried himself with a quiet intensity he'd picked up in Homeland Security. He's a big man, but he moves silently. He just gave me a solid nod, his gaze already sweeping the area, checking the road, the tree line, a silent perimeter check that was second nature to him. The second car held Mark, my youngest. He bounced out with a different kind of energy, a postal inspector's restless curiosity. He gave my shoulder a squeeze. "Don't worry, Dad," he said with a small, confident grin. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, this Mara lady is stepping in it big time." They brought in briefcases and laptops. My old oak kitchen table, the one where they'd done their homework as kids, was suddenly a command center, the heart of our counteroffensive. It was time to go to war. Dana laid it all out like she was briefing a case. She took my certified plat map, the one from the county clerk, and placed it in the center of the table. "This is our foundation," she said. "The ground truth." Then she placed another map beside it, one she had printed from the digital files the county had on record from a filing made 6 weeks ago. At first glance, they looked identical, but then Mark took a ruler and laid it across the two maps. The line was subtle. On Mara Jansen's map, the boundary of the Lakeside Pines HOA had been nudged about 200 feet to the north, a neat little curve that just happened to swallow up my entire property, including my dock and boathouse. "She didn't just move a line," Ray said, his voice a low rumble. "She stole your land on paper." Next, Mark pulled out a document. "And this," he said, "is how she made it legal." It was the community vote Mara had mentioned on the phone, a single page claiming the homeowners had voted to annex my land. Below was a list of signatures. Mark had already highlighted 3 of them. "Frank Miller," he read, tapping the first name. "He died in 2018. I checked the public records. Joan Peterson, stroke, 2020. Carl Beasley, he moved to Florida 10 years ago." My jaw tightened. These weren't just names. They were my neighbors. Frank had helped me put the roof on the cabin. Joan used to bring Sarah flowers from her garden. Mara hadn't just forged documents, she'd used the memory of my friends to do it. It was a special kind of evil. We sat there for a moment in silence, the 3 pieces of paper on the table telling a story of calculated criminal greed. My original deed, clear and simple, the forged map, the fraudulent vote. It was a paper trail of a crime in progress. Just as I was processing the sheer audacity of it, I heard the telltale rattle of the mail slot in my front door. I went to check it. On the floor was a crisp white envelope with the Lakeside Pines HOA logo on it. No stamp, it had been delivered by hand. My hands were steady now as I opened it. Inside was a new bill, second notice. Fines doubled. The original amount of nearly $12,000 was now crossed out. The new total was $23,480.52. They had added a new fine for non-compliance with exterior paint code. The color of my cabin, the same soft brown it had been for 30 years, was now apparently a $10,000 violation. It was so absurd, so brazen, that I almost had to laugh. They were just making it up as they went along, trying to bury me in fake debt to create so much pressure that I would break. I brought the letter back to the kitchen table and laid it next to the other evidence. My kids looked at it, and a cold anger settled over the room. This wasn't about a boathouse or paint colors anymore. This was about whether a person's life, their home, could be taken away with nothing more than a few lies printed on paper. I looked from the fake bill to the solid truth of my grandfather's deed. I thought about what it means to own something, to have a place in the world that is yours. They think a line on a map is just something you can move, but it's not. It's tied to the ground it represents. You can't vote against gravity, and you can't just move a boundary line because you want a prettier dock. The next morning, the fight came to my front door again, but this time it wasn't quiet. It was 5:30 a.m., still dark out, when a tremendous bang and the screech of tortured metal jolted me out of bed. It sounded like a car crash in my driveway. I rushed to the window and saw the taillights of a massive truck pulling away. It had left something behind, a 30-yard dumpster, the kind you see at major construction sites, dropped squarely at the end of my driveway, completely blocking it. It wasn't just blocking my car, it was positioned so that no vehicle, not an ambulance or a fire truck, could get in or out. This was a cage. I could see a sign spray painted on its rusty red side, property of Lakeside Pines HOA. Debris removal. They were calling my life debris. I didn't panic. The initial shock quickly hardened into a cold, methodical anger. My kids were already up, drawn by the noise. Ray stood at the window, his arms crossed, his face a stony mask. He saw it not as an inconvenience, but as a tactic, a barrier, a threat. "They're trying to box you in, Dad," he said, his voice flat. "Make you feel helpless." But I wasn't helpless. I was documenting. I picked up my phone, but before I did anything else, I showed Mark my system. It was simple, the way an old electrician likes things. "See," I said, holding up my phone. "I don't use any fancy apps. I just open the Notes app on my phone. I write down the date, the time, and what happened. 5:32 a.m. Large dumpster dropped, blocking driveway. Then I take my photos, the dumpster, the license plate of the truck if I can get it, its position. I make sure the timestamp is on in the camera settings. It's proof." Mark nodded, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. Then he looked at the hand-delivered notice from the day before. He tapped the name at the bottom. Greg Purcell, HOA Treasurer. "All right," Mark said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Let's see if Mr. Purcell wants to talk about his debris." He found the HOA's number and dialed, putting the call on speaker for us all to hear. He wasn't Mark Weller, U.S. Postal Inspector, he was just a concerned son. The phone was answered by a gruff, sleepy voice. "Yeah." "Hello," Mark said, his voice friendly and polite. "I'm calling on behalf of my father, Tom Weller. We're just a little confused about this large dumpster that appeared in his driveway this morning, and we'd like to get it sorted out." There was a chuckle on the other end. "Sorted out? You pay the fine, it gets sorted out. Simple." It was Greg Purcell. He sounded exactly like a man who enjoyed his petty power. "I understand," Mark said, his tone still perfectly reasonable. "But we're trying to figure out what the fines are even for. This property isn't in your HOA. Greg laughed again, a wheezing, unpleasant sound. "Says you. Says our paperwork. You are. And until you pay up, things are just going to get more inconvenient. A lot more." And then Mark laid the trap. "We just want this to stop," he said, putting a little desperation in his voice. "My dad's an old man. We don't want any trouble. We're thinking he should just sell the place and move." The line went quiet for a beat. We all held our breath. When Greg spoke again, his voice was dripping with smug satisfaction. He thought he was winning. "Well now," he said slowly, savoring the moment. "That's the smartest thing I've heard all day. To be honest with you, kid, we'll make it so he wants to sell. It'll be a lot cheaper for him in the long run." Mark's eyes met mine across the kitchen table. He had him, a direct admission of their strategy, harassment with the goal of forcing a sale. Mark ended the call politely, but the air in the room had changed. We now had a voice to go with the paper trail. Dana had been typing silently on her laptop the entire time. Without looking up, she said, "That's extortion. Combined with the mail and wire fraud from the forged documents, that's a federal case." But she wasn't ready to play that card. Not yet. We had to follow the proper local channels first. We would beat them using their own rulebook, but legally this time. Dana drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was a thing of beauty, clear, direct, and ironclad. It listed the illegal blockade of my driveway, the fraudulent documents, the fines levied without jurisdiction, and cited the recorded conversation with Greg Purcell as evidence of a coordinated harassment campaign. We weren't asking. We were demanding. An hour later, the county sheriff himself, a man I'd known for 20 years, pulled up on the main road. He couldn't get down my driveway, of course. He got out of his car, looked at the dumpster, and shook his head. He walked over, and I met him by the road. I handed him the letter. He read it, his expression growing grimmer with each line. He walked over to the Lakeside Pines entrance, and a few minutes later, Mara Jansen emerged from her perfectly looking house, her face a mask of polite concern. The sheriff didn't raise his voice. He just handed her the letter. The look on her face as she read, it was worth more than the $23,000 they claimed I owed. The sugary charm vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. 20 minutes later, the same truck that had dropped the dumpster returned, and with another series of groans and screeches, hauled it away. The driveway was clear. It was a victory, small but sweet. We had pushed back, and they had retreated. But that night, as the sun went down over the lake, my phone buzzed. It was a neighbor from down the road. "Tom," he said, his voice worried. "You might want to look at the Lakeside Pines HOA Facebook page." I pulled it up on my laptop. There, at the top of the page, was a new post. It was a picture of my cabin, the one the man with the telephoto lens had taken. Underneath it, in big bold letters, was "Public Notice of Violation and Non-Compliance." And right there for the whole world to see, they had tagged me by name. My private fight was now a public spectacle. They weren't just trying to take my home, they were trying to take my name. The Facebook post was meant to isolate and shame me. It was a digital version of putting someone in the stocks in the town square. Mara Jansen thought that by making it public, she could paint me as a stubborn old man who wouldn't follow the rules, turning the community against me. She was wrong. Instead of anger from my neighbors, I got phone calls. First from Bill, who lives 2 roads over. "Tom," he said, "I saw that post. It's garbage. They fined me $500 last month because my garden gnome was, and I quote, not in harmony with the natural woodland setting." An hour later, another call, this time from a woman named Cheryl. "They sent me a violation because my welcome mat was half an inch too wide," she told me, her voice trembling with anger. I thought I was the only one. The public shaming had backfired. Mara had shown her hand not just to me but to everyone, and people were starting to see the pattern. But while the neighbors were getting angry, Dana was getting to work. The Facebook post was defamation, another log on the fire, but she was looking for the source of the rot. "This isn't about pride or power, Dad," she explained, her laptop open on the kitchen table again. "It's about money. It's always about money." She filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the state agency that oversees HOAs. A FOIA request is simple. It's a formal demand for public records. It says, you are a public-facing body, and the public has a right to see how you operate. Dana asked for the last 5 years of the Lakeside Pines HOA's financial filings, budgets, and meeting minutes. They had to comply. A week later, the documents arrived in a large digital file. Dana spent a full day at the kitchen table, piecing it all together. The table was covered in spreadsheets she printed out, with lines of numbers and notes in the margins. I kept her supplied with coffee. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she leaned back and let out a long, slow whistle. "Found it," she said. She turned the laptop toward me. It was a budget summary. For the last 5 years, under community maintenance, the HOA had spent over $500,000, but the line item for actual work, landscaping, road repair, snow removal, only accounted for about half of that. "Right here," Dana said, pointing to a recurring expense category labeled General Contracting and Site Management. The total was $218,000. There were no receipts, no specific invoices, just a lump sum paid out every quarter. "That's a slush fund," Ray said, looking over her shoulder. But it got worse. Dana dug into the state's business registry. She searched for the company that was receiving all those payments, Jansen Contracting. The sole proprietor, the owner of the company, was a man named David Jansen, Mara Jansen's brother. The HOA president was paying her own brother from the community funds for work that was never specified and likely never done. This was the engine of her entire operation. The bogus fines she charged people like me and my neighbors weren't just for power. They were to cover the holes in the budget left by the money she was funneling to her own family. The evidence was now overwhelming. That evening, my garage looked less like a workshop and more like a secret meeting hall for a suburban resistance. Bill and Cheryl came, along with another homeowner, a young guy who'd been fined for the color of his kid's tricycle. There were only 4 of them, but it felt like an army. They were nervous, but they were tired of being pushed around. I stood in front of them with my kids beside me, and we laid out the proof on my workbench. The forged map, the fraudulent vote, Greg Purcell's recorded admission of harassment, and now the financial records showing a clear pattern of embezzlement and self-dealing. We had them. We planned our next steps carefully. We would file a collective complaint with the state attorney general. We had enough evidence to demand the HOA's charter be revoked and the board dissolved. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of real hope. We were organized. We had a plan. We were going to win. The meeting wrapped up around noon the next day. I felt good, solid. I needed to run to the hardware store in town to pick up some supplies, not for a project, just to have on hand. It was a normal Saturday errand. I was gone for maybe 2 hours. I heard it before I saw it. As I turned onto my road, I could hear a buzzing sound, like an angry wasp, but it wasn't a wasp. It was a chainsaw. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. I rounded the final bend, and my heart stopped. Where my boathouse had stood for 30 years, there was now just a pile of splintered wood and broken dreams. Ted the foreman and his crew were there, just finishing the job. They had torn it down. The roof I'd shingled with Sarah, the walls we'd painted, the little window she'd picked out because it caught the morning sun, it was all gone. They had moved with stunning speed, a brutal, efficient act of destruction while I was away. I stumbled out of my car, my legs weak. The foreman, Ted, wouldn't look at me. He just packed up his tools and motioned for his crew to get in the truck. They drove off, leaving behind the wreckage. I just stood there, staring at the empty space on the dock, the gaping wound where a piece of my life used to be. My neighbor Bill came running down the road. "Tom, I am so sorry. We called the sheriff as soon as we saw them, but they were done in no time. They worked so fast." He looked devastated for me. "And Tom, there's something else," he said, his voice low. After the big crew left, another truck came. A pickup. Mara's nephew. He loaded up all the good lumber, the old-growth cedar. Said it was salvage. They hadn't just destroyed my property, they had looted it, stolen the very bones of my past right out of the wreckage. I sat down on the edge of my ruined dock, the place where Sarah and I used to watch the sunset. And for the first time since this all began, the fight went out of me. They had finally hit me where I lived. For a long time, I just sat there on the splintered edge of the dock, in the empty space where 30 years of my life had been. The air smelled of freshly cut raw wood. The sound of the chainsaw was gone, but it echoed in my head. I ran my hand over the rough, broken planks at my feet. My fingers found something smooth tucked in a crack. A small, faded photograph that must have been tacked to a wall inside the boathouse and fallen out during the demolition. I picked it up. It was a picture of Sarah and me, taken the summer we finished building it. We were both so much younger, covered in sawdust, smiling at the camera. She was holding the hammer, and I had my arm around her. We were so proud. Looking at her smiling face in that photo, and then looking at the pile of wreckage, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't loud, it was a quiet, heavy collapse. The fight was gone. They had won. They had not just torn down a building, they had torn down a memory. My kids found me sitting there. Dana put a hand on my shoulder. Ray stood beside her, his jaw set like stone. Mark just looked at the debris field where the boathouse used to be, his usual quick-witted energy gone, replaced by a cold fury. They didn't offer empty comforts. They didn't say, "It's okay, Dad." They knew it wasn't. They just stood with me in silence. After a while, Ray spoke, his voice low and hard, like gravel rattling in a steel can. "That's it," he said. "The defensive posture is over. We stop reacting. We start acting." I looked up at him, then at Dana and Mark. I saw the same look in all their eyes. It wasn't just about defending my property anymore. They had made this personal. They had hurt their father. They had declared war on the wrong family. The shift was absolute. We went from defense to offense. That night, The kitchen table wasn't for legal documents, it was for planning. Ray took charge. This was his world now. Surveillance and tactics. She can't help herself, he said, talking about Mara. She's a bully who needs to feel in control. She destroyed the boathouse. Now she'll be watching constantly to make sure you don't dare defy her by rebuilding. We're going to use that against her. We're going to bait her into walking into a trap she can't escape. The plan was simple but brilliant in its understanding of our enemy. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought a dozen 2x4s and a sheet of plywood. I didn't buy enough to build a shed, just enough to make it look like I was starting to. I stacked the wood neatly on the dock, right where the old boathouse used to be. The stage was set. Step 1 was the bait. I spent an afternoon at the kitchen table with a pencil and a ruler, drawing up a set of decoy plans for a new and improved boathouse. I made them look detailed, adding notes in the margins like exceeds county code and reinforced foundation. I left the plans spread out on my workbench in the garage, clearly visible through the window. It was an invitation for a nosy HOA president to come snooping. Step 2 was the trap itself. While I set the bait, Ray went to work. He had 4 small motion-activated cameras. They were no bigger than a golf ball. He was an expert at this. He placed the first one inside a birdhouse that hung from an oak tree, its tiny lens peeking out of the entrance hole. It had a perfect, clear view of the dock and the new pile of wood. He put the second one under the eave of the garage, aimed directly at the window where the decoy plans were sitting. The third he tucked into a thick hedge bush that bordered the property line she would have to cross. The last one he placed inside my cabin, looking out the back window, capturing a wide angle of the whole yard. They were all linked wirelessly to a small, secure server he set up, and the feed went directly to his and Dana's phones. We would see anyone who set foot on my land, day or night. All we had to do now was wait. The next 2 days were tense. We checked the feeds constantly. We saw a squirrel run across the dock. We saw a UPS driver deliver a package. We saw Bill's golden retriever wander over to sniff the new lumber. Each time the motion alert pinged on Ray's phone, our heads would snap up, but nothing happened. I started to think maybe we had overestimated her arrogance. Maybe destroying the boathouse had been enough for her. Then, on the third day at 11:30 in the morning, Ray's phone pinged. He held it up. The image on the screen made my blood run cold. It was Mara Jansen. She had parked her car up on the main road and was walking down my driveway, bold as you please. She held a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, already taking pictures of the stacked lumber. She walked right out onto my dock, inspecting the wood like she had every right in the world to be there. After a moment, she turned and headed for the garage, her eyes zeroed in on the window, exactly as Ray had predicted. She leaned in, trying to get a better look at the decoy plans on my workbench. She was trespassing. We had her. I looked at Dana, a silent question in my eyes. She just gave me a small, grim smile and nodded toward the driveway. Just as Mara raised her phone to take a picture through my garage window, I heard it, the sound of tires on gravel. It wasn't one car, it was two. 2 black SUVs, the kind that don't have hubcaps, rolled silently down my driveway and came to a stop, perfectly blocking her exit. The trap was sprung. Mara Jansen was so focused on my garage window that she didn't hear the SUVs until they were already stopped. The quiet crunch of gravel under their heavy tires made her spin around. The smug proprietary look on her face dissolved like sugar in hot coffee, replaced by a flicker of confusion that quickly curdled into alarm. The doors of the lead SUV opened, and 3 people stepped out. They didn't look like HOA enforcement. They wore dark suits, their movements economical and precise. They were federal agents. Dana stepped out of the passenger side of the second SUV. She wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a plain blue jacket, but she moved with more authority than all of them combined. Mara's face, which had been pale with shock, suddenly flooded with indignant red. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice a little too high. "This is private property. You are trespassing." Dana didn't answer her. She just walked calmly toward Mara, stopping a few feet away. I watched from my kitchen window as my daughter, the person I taught to ride a bike, stood there as the calm center of a storm she had created. While the agents from the first car fanned out to secure the scene, Dana just looked at Mara. "Ma'am," she began, her voice perfectly level, "while you are currently trespassing on my father's property, that's the least of your problems today." Just then, the county sheriff's car pulled in behind the SUVs, and the sheriff himself got out, holding a sheaf of papers. He nodded once to Dana and then, with 2 deputies, walked right past us, heading for the manicured entrance of Lakeside Pines and Mara Jansen's front door. He was serving the search warrants on her house and her home office at the exact same moment. Mara watched them go, her mouth slightly open. The illusion of her power was evaporating in the morning sun. She turned back to Dana, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association." Dana reached into her jacket and pulled out her credentials. She didn't flash them, she just held them open for Mara to see. "Mara Jansen," she said, and her voice was now stripped of any warmth, becoming the official voice of the United States government. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." My daughter read a bully her rights on the very dock her victim had built, on the spot where the evidence of her crime lay in a pile of splintered wood. Mara didn't scream or fight. All the bluster, all the sugary condescension, it all just drained away, leaving behind a hollowed-out woman who finally understood she had pushed the wrong person. One of the agents stepped forward with handcuffs. The crisp metallic click as they closed around Mara's wrists was the loudest sound in the world. The case that followed wasn't complicated. With the evidence my kids had gathered, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. The prosecution laid it all out, the altered plat maps filed with the county, the forged votes with signatures from people who had been dead for years, the fraudulent notices delivered by hand to avoid mail fraud charges, a trick that my postal inspector Sunmark explained to the court with professional clarity. Dana's team had recovered emails from Mara's computers. They showed everything. There was one she had sent to Greg Purcell, the treasurer, after I first called her office. It read, "The old man on the lake called. He knows the deed. Stall him. We need to make him sell before he figures it out. Don't worry about the law, we are the law here." That one email sealed her fate. They also had the HOA's financial records, the one showing $218,000 in unaccounted funds paid directly to her brother's Phantom Contracting Company, and they had raised camera footage, crystal clear video of her trespassing on my property to further her campaign of harassment. She had built a cage of fake rules for others, and we had simply used the real laws to lock her inside it. The judge was a no-nonsense woman who had seen her share of HOA tyrants. She didn't just find Mara guilty, she made an example of her. Mara Jansen was convicted of conspiracy, wire fraud, and extortion. Her right-hand man, Greg Purcell, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had confessed everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. The judge's restitution order was the final nail in the coffin of their little kingdom. She ordered Mara to pay me $64,000 in personal damages for the harassment and the emotional distress. She ordered the full and complete reconstruction of my boathouse, to be paid for out of her personal assets, not the HOA's funds. And the final, beautiful blow, she ordered the Lakeside Pines HOA board immediately dissolved. Its charter was revoked, and it was to be placed under the independent administration of a court-appointed receiver. Her power was gone. Her money was gone. Her kingdom was gone. The best part of the whole thing was the county commissioners meeting a month later. Spurred on by the case, they voted unanimously to pass a new ordinance. All HOAs in the county would now be subject to mandatory independent financial audits every 2 years. My fight had protected not just my own property, but potentially hundreds of others. The next Saturday, a different kind of truck pulled into my driveway. It was a lumber truck filled with beautiful new cedar planks, the kind that smells like hope. My neighbors, Bill and Cheryl, and the others who had stood with me, Showed up with tool belts and coffee. We spent the weekend rebuilding the boathouse. We weren't just putting up walls, we were rebuilding a community based on respect, not rules written by a bully. As I drove the last nail into the new roof, standing in the same spot where I'd stood with Sarah all those years ago, I looked out over the quiet water. The mist was hanging low over the lake again, just how I liked it. You can't vote against gravity, it's a fundamental law of the world. It will always pull you back down to earth. And you can't fake your way out of the truth. It will always eventually come out into the light.